I know a lot of people have been the demand to have Yaron Weitzman back on the show was so large. We had him on last week. Now I've finished the book since I have talked to Yaron the last time we had him on. I had only read up to chapter 8, which is mostly covering Hinkie. And when we had him on, we went into detail about Hinkie's tenure. I have since finished the book, and the demand to have him back on was large enough that we reached back out, and he was kind enough to do so and join us right now on the Boardwalk Honda hotline to continue our look at tanking to the top. Now, we did a full book report on this on last week's show for about an hour. I went through the whole book and broke down many nuggets, but it's good to have you back to get some more insight on the book. It's called Tanking to the Top. Yaron Weitzman is the author, and he is back with us. Yaron, welcome back.
Thank you. I missed that. I got to go back and listen. That's great to hear. I appreciate it. Thank you.
Yes. Well, we kind of broke it down. I did finish the book last week, and we kind of, when you were on, we looked a lot at Hinkie and his role. And, once I read through the book and people, I'm kind of a Hinkie guy. I felt like, that the league kind of stepped in, and you kind of chronicle that, it's a little bit of a mix, it seems like, right? It seemed like Hinkie was kind of getting in trouble with the Jahlil Okafor situation seemed to be the doom for him. Is that what you kind of found in this book? Was that the Okafor handlings was the beginning of the end for him?
I would say, or to use the awful cliche, which I usually never use, but it applies here, right? The straw that broke the camel's back, it's more like that. I agree with you, right? He was getting it. He's in the middle of the circle and storms coming from all sides. So you have, Scott O'Neil and Sixers business side of things, not so happy. You have agents not happy. Other teams aren't happy. The league office isn't happy. Other owners aren't happy. His owners are hearing from other owners aren't happy. They're starting, all of a sudden when you, and as we saw this week, right, these are people who care what the public thinks. And, if you're owning a basketball team and everyone hates what the team's doing, suddenly owning the basketball team, it's not quite as fun, right? So you have all that stuff going on. And then the Okafor thing on TMZ, and that was it. So that's kind of how it's like, yeah, people always ask, what was it? What led to the ousting of Hinkie? And there's no one answer. It's a snowball effect, really.
Well, there's a group of people, a large group, and I would put myself more in that, ilk of people that would say the NBA stepped in and told Josh Harris that he needs to remove Hinkie. And maybe it's not as forceful as that, but it was like the Okafor stuff was like the opening of the door to the NBA and Harris kind of coming together and being like, look, you got problems there. And if you don't do something about it, we might.
Right, and the only thing I agree partly, what I would say is, and you know this, but people don't when people hear the NBA steps in, it's not like Harris and league office or Sixers management or ownership and the league office, they're not speaking for 1 year, and then one day Adam Silver picks up the phone and says, "Get me Josh Harris," and so this has to happen, right? It's more of a slow thing. They're in touch a lot, right? There's communication, there's back and forth. My understanding is there were some discussions before about, maybe this isn't a great idea. Again, if the league's not happy, if other owners aren't happy, these are ongoing conversations. The way it was explained to me is that after that, Harris was the one who finally said, "Okay, can you guys get me somebody else to help?" And then that's where we get introduced to that. That through the NBA asked Jerry Colangelo to take Josh's call, right? Things like that. Rod Thorne was another name floated in terms of a guy who, and I put that in the book, in terms of a guy who the NBA suggested could kind of come in and, oversee things, and one of these NBA veterans. But the NBA, I also have the NBA called up the Sixers security after the Okafor thing was going on and said, Adam Silver, the league wants to know why one of the Sixers players, one of our players, is on TMZ and nobody from the team has called the league, right? So just, again, it's not, it's this, right? It's a back and forth. So it's kind of, that's how it goes. It's not just like Adam Silver says one day, "Get me Josh Harris," and tell him that's it.
There was a quote from the book from an anonymous general manager who said he was always throwing out the worst bleeping trade offers.
Yeah.
So is there an unwritten rule in the NBA general manager fraternity? This is how we operate. This is how we do things. Don't be disrespectful with certain offers and trying to undermine or undercut us. And that was basically one of the other straws that broke the camel's back.
Yeah, for sure. But again, when I'm saying other teams aren't happy, like give this to Hinkie. He certainly he knew how to annoy a lot of people on a lot of different jobs, right? So like that, I just love. First of all, don't you love when like when professional sports sound like your fantasy league, right? When like
I was going to say,
getting angry.
My best friend is Sam Hinkie. He throws out the worst trades and thinks they all are great, and you're like, dude. And when I read that part of the book, I'm like, that is my best friend. Like, he is Hinkie. He thinks his trades all make sense.
But it's funny though. But then all you need is one, and that's why. So whether it's the Kings, like I forget all the exact details, but when he ripped off Lottie and when they got the protected pick, right? Like that trade was ridiculous, and to get money, like so you got it sometimes works. Or I've talked. This wasn't something in the book, but I've talked to people from other teams who half jokingly, who half joke that before you complete any trade, just like your checklist should be call the Knicks because you never know, see what's going to happen there. I guess it's I guess a reading of the room, right? It's kind of the idea. So it depends. You should know who you're dealing with, and I guess if it gets repetitive, that's the issue, right? Like if every time you're just you're throwing out these ridiculous offers, again, that's just some people.
Right. There's a debated topic in Philadelphia between Sixers fans of, is the process complete? Was the process completed? So writing this book, getting all the inside information that you received, do you feel like it was completed in Sam Hinkie's mind, or how much undone work was there on the table?
Even before he was ousted or before he was or whatever, resigned? Or you mean?
Yeah, I guess just up to his final day on the job.
Yeah, no, listen, he believed, like, in his resignation letter, like, I think he believed what he was writing about. He had set them in a decent, in a better path, and he wasn't wrong about that, right? Like, if you're going to go, if you're going to go simply on process over results, then, we were bad, and now we are set on a path towards something, he was 100% right. I think he had, he would have done things very differently afterward, and I think he had other plans and greater thoughts, and one of them would be not to accelerate the timeline to the way it's been, where they started chasing things pretty quickly. Or skipped over the fun stage, right? They kind of went straight to we have to contend now. I guess in his mind, like I think it's a good question, right? I think he both probably felt good about where he left the team in terms of it's very clear. I came in, I had a plan, we're on a better path. But he also he felt betrayed by how the rug was sort of pulled out from under him early, right, in a way that he didn't expect.
Now, Yaron Weitzman's with us. He's the author of the book, Tanking to the Top. It's chronicles Sam Hinkie and the Sixers. And by the way, it doesn't just all talk about Sam. We will get into some of the other post-Hinkie stuff because we talked about the other day, if you can write one book and get a tell-all on one of the Sixers stories, which one would it be? Is it the Hinkie? Is it the Colangelo? Is it the Fultz? You can do a ton of books just on the Sixers since Hinkie. But the one thing is, you just said he felt betrayed. Do you think he felt betrayed by Harris, or was it others in the organization that he just couldn't get along with? Because I always wondered, did Harris give up on him, or were others going to Harris and being like, look, I can't do my job because of this guy, the way I want. Like you just mentioned, the timeline, did the marketing side be like, look, we got to speed this up, and this guy wants to keep us in neutral for another 2 years, and I can't do that if I want to make some deals?
No, for sure that happened, right? I have the story in the book where I have Scott O'Neil pitching StubHub on being the team sponsor, right? Scott O'Neil, the CEO of the team, running the business side, and he's pitching StubHub on being a jersey sponsor. And I asked the StubHub president, "How were you worried about sponsoring a team that was so bad?" And he said, "No, what Scott said, by the time jersey sponsorships are permitted, that'll be about 2 years out, and by then we'll be really good. By then the team will be really good." He's shown me why. And, that's something Sam Hinkie would never agree upon or to. He just didn't believe in timelines like that. So that pressure, that internal pressure was certainly coming. That said, I still think the betrayal would be felt from ownership, right? It's ownership's job to kind of see the greater picture. We'll tell people, so in that example, you say, okay, Scott, whoever, business person X, we're not going to be judging you on season ticket sales these next 2 years because that's okay. We're holding off a little bit. We have a greater plan here. It's ownership where he felt most betrayed. Sorry, he's crawled into the room, quarantine life. But it's ownership where he felt most betrayed in terms of, I think he gets called the architect, and I agree. But the analogy I always use, right? If you're an architect, somebody hires you to carry out a vision or to renovate your house. It's a vision you guys agree upon, right? That's what happened here.
Yeah.
It's not like Hinkie came and said to them, "Oh, I want to tear everything down," and they're like, "Oh my God, we never thought about that. A genius. Let's do that." Right? It was more like discussions in the interview process of what's going to happen. Here's what we need to do. Again, if you understand the private equity business, just to oversimplify it, you buy a distressed asset, you tear it down, you strip it for parts, build it back up, right? Does that sound familiar, right? So this wasn't sound like a foreign thing, and this kind of fit with what Harris and his partners were, how they approached business, how they approached the world. They spoke the same language was a phrase people would always use in terms of talking about Harris and Hinkie. So I think that's where he felt most betrayed. He felt like he had an ally there, somebody who saw things in a similar way. They were on the same page, and suddenly that changed.
So Sam writes the resignation, but they tried to bring Danny Ferry in to work with him, and then that kind of didn't work. And then, he just decided, all right, the walls are closing in, I'm going to resign. And then that's when the whole Colangelo thing kind of happened. And I think that's where a lot of Sixer fans really felt like, all right, the nepotism was coming in. But you kind of chronicled in the book that Colangelo felt it too. Like, he wasn't obtuse to the fact that this was going to be tough. But how difficult was it for Colangelo? Was he surprised at how much Hinkie was revered?
Yes, 100%, 100%. Yeah, for sure. I read about the Rights to Ricky Sanchez guys in the book, and there's for a reason. That voice, the loudness, the loud vocal, strong Hinkie support was not something he or the Sixers were prepared for 100%, right? And then Colangelo, like you said, and I found this fascinating, some stuff I wasn't aware of, I'm doing research, and you find quotes from Brian from 1990 in Arizona Republic articles talking about, how his father had hired him, and how Brian saying, "Yeah, I'm aware of the nepotism charge. That's something that really bothers me." Brian leaving the NBA for a little bit at one point to go work in real estate and different things. And he was very aware of the nepotism accusation, and he was always fighting against that. He wanted to take a Brooklyn Nets job. He almost got it before getting passed over Mark, and that's when he ended up in Philadelphia. I think he probably felt I'm guessing the equation was, okay, this is not ideal because my father, but we have a good team. We can win. If I win, that will be, that will be it. That speaks louder. He may not have been right about that anyway. But no, I think it ended up being, well, in hindsight, it's easy to see now. And with the Burnergate stuff, we all see it becomes clear. But it was just, the combination of someone who's always felt like he had to prove himself, prove that he wasn't just Jerry's kid, coming back and working for Jerry again in a place where a lot of the fan base, not only did they not want him there, but they revered the guy he was replacing, had this cult-like following. It was just an awful situation and not a good setting for him.
Talk about Brett Brown, because he's another guy that's highly debated, and talk about him then in the Sam Hinkie era and how Brett Brown was viewed to now, and how Brett Brown is viewed in the post-Sam Hinkie era.
Yeah, well, different jobs, right? I mean, the Kenny Atkinson thing is what I always compare it to, the guy who didn't finish the first part of the rebuild and doesn't make it on. They hired Brett Brown because he was a really good player development guy, they felt, and he was relentlessly optimistic, and those are two obvious traits that are great if you have a rebuilding team with young guys. Brett, I'll say this also about Brett Brown. I'll use the word shenanigans. I don't know if as a head coach had to endure and then speak about or speak to or be the face, not the face of, be the spokesman for so many shenanigans. Whether you got, the Brian Colangelo stuff, Markel stuff, all of the Joel stuff, Jaleel, Nerlens, just every Hinkie, right? All of it, craziness. Kind of feel a little bad on that end. And I do, in a way, I'm sure, he was hired to get them through phase one. They didn't know if he would make it later. I don't think Hinkie knew, and that's not how Hinkie thought. Right? Hinkie figured, we have this guy, he's perfect for now. Maybe he'll be great when we become great. Maybe not. That's not really a concern now. Those are the kind of things you learn on the fly. I do think Brett struggled a little bit with just, I go on this stuff a lot, just some of the, creating a culture of accountability within the locker room. And again, it could be his fault, could not be. It goes both ways. It's on the players too. He was dealt a tough hand in terms of some of the personalities they brought in. But I think that's some of the stuff that plagued him and the Sixers early on and continues to do so now.
Yeah, it's chronicled in there about how difficult it was to be, because NBA coaches don't want to be the police officer. They want to coach the team. Most teams have a veteran that steps in, and that was one of the knocks on Hinkie was he stripped the team down so much that they had no veteran to kind of take control of that role, leaving the coach to do so. But that's not something an NBA coach is really looked at to do all that much, right, Yaron? I mean, to have to police Nerlens Noel smelling like weed is not something the coach wants to have to address.
No, it's hard. Your voice can grow stale, and it's hard also when you don't have the hammer. So Hinkie, I get it, right? They drew him in the front office. They felt it was best to kind of stay separate from the coaching staff. I don't mean they never talked, right? But just drawing an imaginary wall, building an imaginary wall, let's say. The idea being, like, one assistant coach, or I forget, somebody told this to me, but the idea being that, they have different incentives, different goals, different priorities, right? The coaching, Hinkie was building a team not to win, right? I compare it to like the Major League One, right? Which he builds that team. But Brett Brown, like he was never going down and telling Brett Brown, don't win this game. Like that's not how he operated. He had too much respect for players and the game and all that stuff. Even though some people might laugh at that. But so like he felt it'd be strange for him to be in communication always with or be talking every day or at practice every day. Well, he felt it, I should say, that it was a weird setup for him to be not interested in team winning while around a coaching staff who you're going to try to coach and win every game, right, and prepare to win every game. But in doing that, he removed, Brett was on an island on some of that stuff, and that can become very difficult.
So I found it interesting that Colangelo indirectly had a little bit to do, maybe a lot to do, with the Sixers acquiring Jimmy Butler, even though he was no longer with the team. He actually had a hand in them acquiring Butler. Is that true?
Yeah, I love that story. I find it so fascinating. And I think it goes back to what we were saying about Brian being very aware of his legacy, quote unquote, what people think, right? So there's a few reasons, but basically the main way this happened and the way this, the main story I had. And, Brian is really good friends with Jimmy Butler's agent from Toronto. Or Jimmy Butler's agent lives in Toronto, and Brian used to obviously live and work there. So Jimmy Butler's agent has a 40th birthday party. His wife throws him a surprise 40th birthday party in Toronto. Brian flies in, Jimmy flies in, and this is in the summer before, was it, or 2018? I'm losing track now. I think it was 2018. The summer when Jimmy was on his way out of Minnesota, right before he blew everything up in the training camp and all that stuff. And he kind of really knew he wanted out. And, him and Brian are sitting near each other at dinner and drinks are flowing. And at one point, Jimmy turns to Brian Colangelo and says, tell me about Philly. And Brian says, that's a great place for you. Like, that's the place you need to be. You win the championship there. And there were a couple other moments, but I find that so interesting that Brian was still sort of selling. And I don't know why. I would guess the reason would be that he thinks, maybe it's purely altruistic also, but I'm guessing also that he believe that, like, if Jimmy went there and they win, that helps him, that makes him look better in future years, right? That would be, because this is after Burnergate, so I don't know. I just find it fascinating.
Yeah. One story that really stood out to me that I think fans aren't aware of, and I believe the guy's name is Rucker. Is that ringing a bell? Alex Rucker, the lawyer?
Yeah, Alex Rucker.
Okay. Is that normal for most organizations to have a guy set your in-game rotations? Because Brett Brown gets hammered for his rotations. And, I don't know why he has to take Embiid out at the 4-minute mark of every game. Well, it appears that he didn't have a whole heck of a lot of say in that. Is that normal in the NBA?
Interesting. Yes, I'll give to Alex Rucker, the head kind of the executive vice president. I forget his official title now. Executive vice president, a number 1 or 2 guy in their front office. And then he has this guy, Sergey Olivia, and I apologize if I'm mispronouncing his name, who works for him in their department, Sergey especially, and he sits on the bench. If you're a Sixers fan, you watch the games, you'll see a guy, kind of a, 5'10"-ish guy with a beard, black hair and a beard, sitting behind Brett Brown usually. And he goes in the locker room, so he's kind of a quote-unquote analytics front office guy, but he's on the bench in the office, and that department for that guy Sergey is making the team's lineups basically in the rotations, and they're doing it based off numbers and rotations and all that kind of stuff. So you add, so like the stuff coming out of 4 minutes and stuff like that, like, yeah, that is I do. I do not think if Brett wanted to change that, that's a great question. Whether he could or not, honestly, I'm not sure. Right? Like if he wanted to change that, I am not sure how that would work. I do not think other teams do it.
The book does say that this guy makes the end games a judgment. Brown's allowed to kind of deviate, but that it's pretty much inferred that what this guy's in-game rotations are, that's what you need to do.
Correct. Yeah, and like it bothered like JJ Redick. It took him a little bit to get used to it last year. He would be pulled out quickly, and they'd be shorter stints and things like that. Like I guess if you're a fan, you're watching, and one of the players is hot, and you wonder why he's coming out, right? That's one of the reasons, right? These things are predetermined. The Sixers take it. I think a lot of teams use which is smart, right? You should be kind of combining data from rotations and coaches and scouting and all that stuff. The Sixers take it to another level in terms of the stringency, I would say.
Okay, a couple more for Yaron Weitzman. The book is called Tanking to the Top. Great read. I read it in 2 days, right over the weekend. Bam. It was quick, great read. Why is Jimmy Butler no longer a Sixer?
Oh, that's a good question. Well, I think Jimmy Butler outlived he was good press for my book, maybe, right? I think Jimmy Butler told us a lot of the reasons in that podcast. So to be honest, I have yet to nail down I should say it was JJ Redick, the podcast, but I have yet to nail down the complete order of operations, right? Like who broke up with who, and you've heard a bunch of different things. When it was decided, it was very clear. Like the Al Horford deal was clearly decided very early on. I'll say in free agency. When I say that, I mean before the official. Before free agency officially opens, the Sixers had clearly decided to move on from Butler pretty quickly after. I would say the answer is mostly, him and Brett were not best of friends. I think it's fair to say, right? Would you guys agree with that? I would say, they definitely did not get along great. To be honest, I do not know who broke up with who. My understanding is the Sixers sort of decided this is not for us to move forward. That's my understing.
Well, it doesn't sound like Brown was lobbying too hard to bring Butler back.
For sure not. For sure not. I mean, I laugh. Like, do you remember when Butler? Like, I love when this happens. I can write myself in the book, but then when these guys give press conferences, and you can just see it for yourself, right? So when Miami comes to Philly, I think it was that, and Brett Brown's asked about Jimmy Butler before the game, and usually in these situations, even if the coach and player didn't get along, the coach was, it was great. We loved that his time here. We're happy that he's in a good situation. Wish him nothing but the best. And I think Brett was more like, I don't really want to talk about Jimmy Butler.
Yeah,
which was pretty telling. Really did not lobby for him, and I do think they the Sixers front office, coaches, ownership also, which they play a role in all this as well in terms of personnel. I think they put a premium, or they tried to put a premium on, I'll call it good quote locker room guys, and I'm using that in quotes because I think we sometimes misuse that term a lot, and I don't think Jimmy fit in that. So according to them, I'm not saying I agree, but I think that's how they were looking at it.
All right, we'll leave you with this because we want people to read the book, and there's great stories inside. Most bizarre thing about the Fultz time in Philly.
God, I'm here. My answer, I was at this. I love the Elton Brand press conference when he came out, and I think it was after Fultz's agent told The Athletic before telling the Sixers that Fultz was going to look at another specialist or something, and Elton Brand came out and was saying the right things, but his face was clearly saying, I am so done with this bleep. Like, it was just very obvious. My answer, it's not a funny answer, but it just his and his team's insistence or refusal to acknowledge that there could be anything going on here other than a shoulder injury, right? Like, to refuse to even entertain that possibility, that would be the one. And I honestly think that's at the root of it all. That would be kind of my answer to that.
Okay. Well, there's a whole chapter. It's called "This Isn't the Bleeping Kid We Drafted," and it's about Markelle Fultz. So check out the book. It's called "Tanking to the Top." Yaron Weitzman was kind enough to jump back on and give us a little bit more detail on it, and we appreciate the time, man. It was a really good read.
No, my pleasure, man. Anytime. We got nothing else to do these days, but I appreciate your help and everything, and thank you.
Sure thing. Tanking to the Top is the book. Yaron Weitzman. He also covers the NBA for Bleacher Report, and he joined us on the Boardwalk on the Hotline.